Marathon launched on March 5, 2026 at $40. By April 22 it was already 20% off on Steam, which dropped the price to roughly $32. That is the first useful fact, because it tells you the launch posture changed early. A quick sale does not prove a game is dead. A quick sale on a premium live service release does suggest the publisher wants more people in fast. Launch pricing is not only about revenue, it is also about signaling confidence. When a company cuts price within 7 weeks, players start asking whether the initial demand was softer than expected. That discount also has a second problem. It may not be deep enough to solve the problem it is trying to solve. Marathon launched at $40. A 20% cut only brings it to about $32. For players already skeptical of paying upfront for another demanding live service game, $32 is still not an impulse buy number. It is still a decision. In this part of the market, that problem looks worse, because Marathon is not only competing with other premium shooters for money, it is competing with free entry. Delta Force, for example, openly markets its extraction mode as free-to-play. That means a skeptical buyer is not just comparing Marathon to another $40 game. He is comparing it to a rival that removes the first barrier completely. So the sale creates concern, without necessarily creating a big enough change in perceived risk to pull in a huge new audience. That is why the pricing move reads less like a breakthrough, and more like an early attempt to widen the funnel. If you're tired of hearing corporate crap, and just want the honest, ugly reality of where gaming is heading, hit subscribe. We're digging into the rot every single day. Marathon was not broadly rejected by critics or by Steam users. Metacritic put it at 82, and Steam users kept it in very positive territory. That means the simplest Doom narrative is wrong. This is not a case where Bungie shipped a broken disaster, and the market instantly punished obvious failure. The core product seems to work for many players. Reviews repeatedly praise the gunplay movement and the underlying loop. That makes the business picture more awkward, not less. Bungie appears to have made a respectable shooter, and still ended up in an uneasy public position almost immediately. Bungie's pedigree makes that signal sharper. This is the studio that helped define how modern console shooters feel. If there is one thing the market expects Bungie to get right, it is moment-to-moment action. The reporting suggests Bungie did get that part right often enough to earn praise. So the problem is not that Bungie forgot how to make a gun feel good. The problem is that good guns, good movement, and a known studio name may no longer be enough to overcome live service fatigue, a high-friction format, and skepticism about long-term commitment. That is what makes the commercial signal harsher. If even Bungie can still nail the feel, and still struggle to find wider market fit, then Bungie magic is not the shield it used to be. That leads to the gap between product quality and market mood. A lot of current players seem to enjoy Marathon. The broader conversation outside the game has been colder and more suspicious. Gams Radar described the public mood as split between heavy Doom posting and a smaller group that genuinely loves the gameplay. That split matters because live service games are judged by more than their active users. They are judged by future users and by spectators deciding whether to commit their time. A game can have strong mechanics and a satisfied core audience, while still sending weak commercial signals to the wider market. The split is not abstract. On Steam the user rating stays strong. Outside Steam, the recurring conversation keeps returning to discount timing, difficulty, niche appeal, and whether the game is already being softened to reach more people. You can see that when the discussion shifts to accessibility. Former FPS pro Shroud said Marathon is good but too hard, too sweaty, and too rough on first impressions. That matters because live service shooters need a constant intake of new players. They do not survive on an elite core alone. They need people who can enter, learn, survive early mistakes, and decide the experience is worth returning to. If the first few hours feel punishing, confusing, and exhausting, many players leave before they become regulars. That is not a minor balance complaint. It is a growth problem. It also points to a deeper strategic conflict. A narrow hardcore audience might accept that. Sony, however, needs something wider. If this is supposed to be a meaningful long-term live service success, that criticism connects to a broader market condition. Marathon launched into an audience already tired of live service obligations. Many players are worn out by games that ask for steady attendance, patch awareness, practice time, social coordination, and recurring spending. They are tired of products that want to become permanent fixtures in the week. That fatigue is not only emotional, it is economic and practical. Every new live service game asks for hours that could go somewhere else, and in Marathon's case, it also asks for upfront money in a subgenre where at least one major competitor offers free entry. Marathon did not enter a neutral environment. It entered one where a large part of the audience was already skeptical of another online commitment. That does not make success impossible. It does mean the pitch had to clear a higher bar than usual. The game's format may have made that harder. One of the smarter recurring criticisms is that Marathon has strong lore, a strong art direction, and a world that many players find interesting. But the extraction structure does not always let those strengths come through for broader audiences. In an extraction shooter, attention gets pulled towards survival, route planning, gear management, and fear of loss. That is the point of the format. In practice, that means players are checking inventory, weighing whether to take a fight, deciding what is worth carrying, and planning how to extract without losing what they brought in. That loop creates tension, but it also redirects attention away from world building. Bungie may have built a setting with broad appeal, and then put it inside a structure that naturally narrows the audience. Sales estimates reinforce the same middle ground reading. GamesRadar, citing analyst Russ Elliott, reported that Marathon sold about 1.2 million copies, with just under 70% of those sales on Steam. Those are not tiny numbers. For many games, they would be respectable. But scale matters. Marathon is a premium live service release from Bungie, backed by Sony after years of development and expectation. The question is not whether 1.2 million copies equals failure in a vacuum. The question is whether 1.2 million copies looks strong enough, relative to the size of the investment, and the kind of launch wave this project likely needed. GamesRadar's framing is useful here, because it says Marathon has not exactly made the splash Sony and Bungie likely wanted. That is the point. That is why underperformance is the right word here. Failure sounds clean and final. This story is neither. Marathon appears to have sold enough to avoid immediate burial, while still failing to create the sort of obvious commercial momentum that would calm every concern around it. It is stuck in the middle. The reviews are solid. The mechanics are praised. The core audience is real. Yet the pricing moved early, the wider market remains skeptical, and the growth questions have not gone away. That combination is exactly why the game keeps generating debate. Good reviews did not erase weak launch signals. The Steam versus Internet divide grounds the abstract point in something people can actually see. On Steam, Marathon retains a strong user rating. Outside Steam, the conversation keeps cycling through player count arguments, difficulty complaints, discount timing, and worries that the game may be too niche for the kind of scale its model requires. That is the concrete contrast. The loyal core is visible in the user rating and in the hours some players are putting in. The doom posting is visible in the wider narrative that keeps treating every commercial wobble as proof of a deeper structural problem. Both are part of the real story. That leads to the trust issue. Saying Marathon is doomed goes beyond the evidence. Saying Marathon has a trust problem fits the evidence far better. A live service launch depends on belief in the future. Players ask whether the game will keep growing, whether matchmaking will stay healthy, whether friends will join, whether content will justify the time investment, and whether the publisher looks confident in the product. Early discounts, accessibility debates, and constant questions about niche appeal all cut into that confidence. A game only needs to look unsettled during the exact window when undecided buyers are deciding whether to come in. Bungie's own post-launch behavior makes that issue harder to dismiss. Recent updates and experiments show the studio trying to reduce friction and widen access. GamesRadar reported that Bungie has big balance changes brewing, while PC Gamer reported on the new free kit frenzy mode and described it as a hit. That test matters because it is not just a random extra playlist. In an extraction shooter, gear fear is one of the core sources of tension. Players worry about losing what they brought in. Free kit frenzy reduces that burden by giving everyone standardized free kits and making the experience more self-contained. Bungie is testing how Marathon feels when one of the genre's defining pain points is dialed down. That is not a small detail. It speaks directly to the structural question. If one of Marathon's more appealing post-launch experiments works by lowering gear pressure and reducing the cost of failure, then Bungie is not merely polishing rough edges. Bungie is testing a version of Marathon that steps away from one of the central burdens of extraction play. That does not prove the genre choice was wrong. It does strengthen the argument that the format itself may be limiting how many people are willing to stay. When a studio keeps looking for ways to make the experience less punishing, it is fair to ask whether the original intake was too narrow for the scale of success the business model needed. The Sony factor raises the stakes. Marathon is not just another shooter from an independent studio. It is part of a much larger strategic picture. Sony bought Bungie for $3.6 billion in 2022, and Bungie was expected to help strengthen Sony's live service capabilities. Marathon now sits inside the broader question of whether that expensive bet on multiplayer expertise is producing the kind of stable wins Sony expected. That means underperformance here carries more weight than it would for a smaller project with lower visibility. Marathon is not only trying to prove itself as a game, it is also functioning as another test of Sony's live service strategy. That is the pressure point. The debate is no longer about whether Marathon has quality. It is about whether quality, loyalty, and Bungie's name can outweigh pricing friction, audience fatigue, and a format that may ask too much from too many players. Put together, the story becomes clear. Marathon launched on March 5 at $40, moved to a 20% discount by April 22, and still only fell to around $32. Critics scored it well, and Steam users stayed broadly positive. Bungie's signature strength in gunplay appears intact, yet that strength has not been enough to erase concern about market fit. Shroud's criticism points to a real intake problem. The broader audience is already tired of new live service obligations. The extraction format may be narrowing the appeal of a world that might work better in a less punishing structure. Estimated sales of about 1.2 million copies are respectable in isolation, but less impressive when measured against Bungie, Sony, and the scale of expectation. The post-launch changes matter because they fit the same pattern. Bungie appears to be searching for a broader version of Marathon, one that keeps the praise gunplay while lowering friction, softening pain points, and giving more people a reason to stay. That does not mean the game is trash. It does not mean shutdown is guaranteed. It means the launch evidence points to a narrower audience than the business model likely required. The useful conclusion is straightforward. Marathon looks like a respected shooter with a real core audience, trapped inside a premium live service launch that started adjusting early because the broader market response was not strong enough or confident enough to carry the original pitch on its own.